Although SUVs are largely terrible, and that's just because they're terrible. However, I must admit there are a few, especially modern ones, few modern SUVs. We're not on about the old ones like the old Ranges, they're fabulous. There are a few modern SUVs that I actually personally like and that I would probably purchase. And here they are. We're going to run through 10 modern SUVs that I actually quite like and why. First off then is the Alfa Romeo Stelvio Quadrifoglio Verde, because this is probably the only truly good looking SUV that's ever been created in the sort of modern era of SUVs after the takeoff of how popular they've become, because it's an Alfa. So Alfa have never made a bad looking car in the history of the company, not even the Arna, which was a Datsun Sunny. That even looked quite good. I mean, it was never an ugly car. Now, the Stelvio isn't a very bad looking car at all. I mean, it's a fairly decent looking thing. It's not as good as the Giulia that it's based on. It just isn't. However, they do the Quadrifoglio version with 503 horsepower, 2.9 litre twin turbo V6, which is a fabulous engine, and it's fairly decent off-road. I would probably buy one, and it is one of the SUVs I like. However, I would still buy a Giulia before I bought the Stelvio, if that makes sense. To be honest, I wouldn't buy one because the Giulia exists, but if somebody gave me one, I wouldn't sort of like be that disappointed because they're very good cars. And I genuinely, it's one of the only sort of in that sector that I like, really, because it has the character and the niche that other ones don't have. I mean, it's not as good interior quality as a BMW, but that's because it's an Alfa. If it had good interior quality, it would be a BMW or an Audi. They're terrible to drive and they're boring. The Alfa is not. And it's not about what the car is to be sat in, really. If they're making a sporty car, it's about what it's like to flipping drive. And that's why I like the Alfa. I like the next one for a bit of a different reason. Now, this one is the Audi SQ7 diesel. Yep, you heard that right, diesel. And it is the pre-facelift of the last generation Q7. So it's, well, of the current generation, shall I say. Before they updated it and stuck a petrol engine in it, they had a pre-facelift, which actually was quite a good looking car for a Q7. The new one is way uglier than the slightly older one. So I'm sort of talking around 2016-ish for this car. Why do I like this? Because I think that in most car collections, you have to have the sort of car that you can tow stuff or that you can sort of use. So it's sort of difficult. So say you do own a supercar and you need something to tow that on a trailer, or you have a trailer like a race car on a trailer, for example, and you need something to tow it with. This is the perfect car. It's got about 800 pound-feet of torque. It's a diesel. It revs. Peak power is really low RPM, which is 429. And the fact that it's a twin-turbo V8 with no stupid soft limiters on it or anything like the modern Audi SQ7, it sounds awesome. Now, this is a diesel engine, right? Diesel engines usually sound like canal boats. However, I have heard one very up close on tickover, and it sounds awesome. And then when it's like setting off, it sounds brilliant. Now, the thing is, every car collection really needs the sort of car that can be a good load lugger or sort of go off-road or anything like that, basically. Now, if you don't want a Range Rover, which I actually wouldn't buy a modern Range Rover, my second option to you, recommendation to you, would be an old diesel Audi SQ7, because they're fast. They do 0 to 60 in 4.9 seconds. They don't look too bad. I mean, they're not beautiful by any means, but they're not ugly-ish. They're not uglier than, they're nowhere near as ugly as the modern ones. But that engine is a gem, because it's torquey, its peak power is dead low, it means it's got rapid mid-range acceleration, because you've always got 429 horsepower. It has a, I think it's got an electronic supercharger on it as well, which means it which kicks in before the turbos and stuff, so that there's never any lag. It's brilliant. and it can tow like 3.5 tons or 4 tons worth of stuff behind it. It's crazy. It's a torque monster. The modern SQ7 petrol has 500 horsepower, so it's got more bhp, but its torque is about 200 pounds-feet less, and it tows less as well, and its peak power is lower at a higher RPM. So at the sort of realistic sort of overtaking a lorry manoeuvre, a diesel SQ7 will leave you for dead, because it's got that 429 horsepower before you can get anywhere near the 500 that you have in your petrol one. And the thing is, in the world of modern SUVs, like sporty ones, the SQ7 stands out because its rivals didn't have the character that this has. I mean, it actually has some. It's crazy. It's an SUV, a big 7-seater with actual character. That's because it was unique in the fact that it was a diesel and had all of better capabilities than the rest of them. For example, its rivals, which at the time would have been the GLS63, the last generation one, and the X5 and stuff, they're all petrol. They're all 600-ish horsepower, 500 horsepower, whatever. And they're all petrol, and they don't have that much torque. And they're not that good off-road. Now, the SQ7 stood out. It was very different. It was very good to drive. It was dead comfortable, very good cruiser. But then it could actually be quite a good fun car, but in a sort of hard way to explain, in the fact that you didn't need to give it much for it to be going pretty quickly because of the low peak power RPM. So, but it stood out, and that was the main thing with it, and that's why I like them, because they stand out from the crowd. Whereas the modern SQ7 just is another SUV. It doesn't have something about it that makes it stand out, which the Audi SQ7's big standout thing was the fact that it was a diesel, and that meant it had a torquier engine than any other on the... It was actually, I think it was one of the torquiest, in pounds-feet terms, cars on the planet at the time. I think at the time, 811 was the highest, which I think was, pound-feet-wise, was in the Mulsanne Speed, the Bentley, but I can't remember. But it had one of the torquiest engines of any production car at the time, and that's what its standout feature was, and that's why it was actually quite a good car, and that's why I like them. So I'm just doing these in any order, but I'm going to go for the Alpina XB7 next. Now this is actually not a wise choice against the X7 M50i, really, because there's not much that separates the two, because it's basically just a tuned version of that car. However, I'm a big fan of niche cars that are very different, and this is that. This is basically the rival to the AMG GLS63 and the SQ7, the new one. Speaking of the SQ7. However, it's not a BMW, it's been tuned by Alpina. And what they've done basically is got the 4.4 litre twin turbo V8 from the X7 and increased the power from 523 to 613 brake horsepower. The top speed has been de-restricted, it now does 180 miles an hour, and the 0 to 60 is down to 4.2. Now, it's unnecessarily fast for a 7-seater, it's not that capable, it weighs about 2.6 tons, but for an SUV, it's not too bad, and I actually have a sort of soft spot for them, and I think they look quite good. Next is the CUPRA Formentor VZ5. Now, this is another standout SUV, a bit like the old SQ7 diesel, in the fact that it actually, firstly, the actual normal CUPRA Formentor is actually a very good car, except for the hybrid ones, which no hybrid really is a good car, to be honest. It's actually quite a good car. I mean, I think it looks quite good for starters. I think they look really cool. They're very good to drive. They're not as good as a Leon Cupra, but they're not proper big SUVs, These are not large, expensive SUVs. These are basically just slightly lifted versions of hatchbacks. This is basically a slightly lifted version of the new Cupra Leon, or the Golf R, for example. So it's not too big and it's not too unstable, and it is actually quite a capable car. Now the VZ5 is the special edition they did. Now it is coming to the UK in left-hand drive only as a special edition with limited numbers, and For this, they shoved in a 2.5 litre turbocharged 5-cylinder, which means it's one of the very few 5-cylinder SUVs on the planet. And it is better looking and much faster than the RSQ3 that it borrows that from, because the SQ3 is bigger. The RSQ3 is bigger. Now, the top speed is electronically restricted to 155, unless CUPRA offer the 174 option that the Audi has. However, just on the looks basis, it's better than the Audi that it's based on. But capability-wise, it can handle and brake very well also. So it's actually quite a good little car. And I think they look cool with the slanted exhaust as well. I've done a video on this, so you can click on the pop-out banner up there to see my video on the VZ5 when it came out. Another one then is one I should not like, but I have to admit, I actually quite like them. It is the new Ford Puma ST. Now, it's nowhere near as good as the Fiesta ST. Got disturbed. Anyway, it's not as good as the Fiesta ST. However, the actual standard Puma as a car isn't a bad little car at all, and it's actually so small that it shouldn't really be classed as an SUV, because it's a Fiesta underneath, and the body's nowhere near as big as a Focus. I mean, it's hardly that big as a car, and it's not that jacked up either. It's front-wheel drive only as well. So really, it shouldn't be classed as an SUV. It's more of a crossover, and that's what it is. The actual CUPRA Formentor is a crossover as well, but it's a small SUV as well. I have to admit, I do quite like the Puma ST. Now, I don't think it's that good looking as a normal one, but I saw a Puma ST recently, up close and personal, in green, and it looked quite good in person. It looks a lot better in person than it does on the photos. Now, the rear isn't that good. I think they could have done a bit more with the bottom end where the exhausts are, like they do with the Fiesta. It looks quite cool there, but they haven't really done much with it. But basically, underneath, it is a Ford Fiesta ST, so they've used the diff, the gearbox, the engine, everything has been taken from the Fiesta ST, which is one of the best cars on sale at all at the minute, one of the greatest cars on sale. So they've used that as an underpinning to make a small crossover. Now, it's not as good as Fiesta, nowhere near, but as a crossover / SUV, I don't think you can get better to drive. Not a single chance of getting anywhere close to the Puma ST. It is the best, probably, I think it is the best small SUV on the planet to drive, easily. Manual only, for starters, front wheel drive, 197 horsepower, plenty, 3-cylinder engine. It's all you want, and it's light as well, compared to the rest of them, which weigh 2.6 tonne. This weighs about 1.4, probably a bit less than that. So it's actually a very good little car, and I have to admit, I do like them because I think they look quite good. And to be honest, it's the Audi is the closest I would get to buying an SUV, the SQ7 diesel. This would be the second closest I would buy. This is the second closest I would get to buying a small SUV. To buy an SUV, and I'd have the big SQ7 and the Puma. But I would never buy the Puma over a Fiesta. I would never get the Puma over the Fiesta, because I think that's just stupid. You have to have the Fiesta and then buy the Puma. But to be honest, there's not much use for the Puma when the Fiesta exists. But if you are in the market for a crossover or an SUV, get yourself a Puma ST. If you are adamant that you're buying one, which I don't see why you would be. If you're not adamant and just think that you would like one, get yourself a Fiesta ST. Okay, we're going back to the Germans now, and we're going to go with a double bill of Mercedes. So, we're starting with the tiny one, which is the GLB35, the AMG one. This car is practically useless because it doesn't have any rivals. Not necessarily, not direct, but it's a sort of weirdly good car. I mean, why would a small 7-seater SUV with 300 horsepower be good? I don't know, but it actually is, and I would have a GLB35 over an A35. I do not know why, but I would, because the thing with the A35 is, if I was going to be in the market for a Merc hatch, I'd just get an A45. The thing with the GLB35 is there's no there's no car better than it for, like, with the, basically, there's no GLB45, if you know what I mean. There's a GLA45, which you wouldn't buy because you get an A45, but there isn't a GLB45. And because you wouldn't buy an A35 because you get an A45, you'd then buy a GLB35. And then, but you wouldn't buy a GLA35 because the GLB is more practical, if that makes any sense whatsoever. That's the thing with it. There's no better version of the GLB35, so you wouldn't end up buying the A35 anyway. You'd end up buying the A45 over the A35 if you was in the market for a hatchback. But if you wanted a small, fast Mercedes, you would end up with the small 7-seater, the GLB35, because it's more practical and it's just as good to drive as the A35. I do not know how they do it, how they make it as good to drive as the A35 and actually a lot better than the GLA. I do not know how they do that, but they have, and it's better looking than the GLA as well. But you can get a 7-seater small Mercedes-AMG with 302 bhp and a 2-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine with all-wheel drive and a 9-speed, I think, dual-clutch automatic gearbox. You can do 0 to 60 in 5.2 seconds. I do not know either, but there's something weird about that car that I really like. Has a certain charm to it just because it's unnecessary and just practically useless, really, when it has no rivals. But there's just something about it, though, that makes it... The main thing is it stands out. It stands out against the crowd, and that is important with cars. They stand out. They're not the same as everything else. And nobody else offers a 7-seat SUV that small in that sort of size range that's hot, except from Skoda, who do the Kodiaq VRS. And I think, yeah, that's it. And there are SUVs that the 7-seats that are fairly not slow, but there's none that are GLB quick. So it's just weird. It just stands out because it's the only... If you want a small 7-seater like that, for example, if you're looking for a family, because when you don't buy that because you buy that because you've got a family, basically. You don't buy it because you want a Chelsea tractor. It's not what it is. It's basically... I mean, it's not a showy off car. You actually buy that because you need it, because you've got lots of kids. You've basically got the market of a Skoda Kodiaq VRS, which is the best on the market 7-seater SUV thing. You got your stuff like your Kia Sorento. You've got your Mercedes GLB. I think you've got a Toyota Highlander as well now and there's loads of different ones like that, basically. But if you want one that's quick as well, though, but a sporty one that you can have a bit of fun in, you've got a choice of two: the Kodiaq VRS and the AMG GLB35. But you're obviously going to buy the Merc because the Skoda's not much cheaper, really, and the Merc is way more luxurious and a hell of a lot faster than the rest of them. It's just... There's just something stupid that I like about the GLB, and I've always liked it since they released it. I don't know why, but I just think it's got a whiff of coolness to it. It's got an aspect of coolness that other SUVs don't have. So that's why I like it. Okay, so the second German in this list then is the Mercedes-AMG G63. Now, I noticed when I came to edit this video that this part had been missed out. Now, I mustn't have been able to record it, so immediate apologies for the, like, pyjamas and stuff, basically. That's because it's actually quite late, and I'm just getting this done. So that's why there's an outfit change. But immediate apologies about that. But, G63 then. Why do I like this thing? Well, it's expensive. It's a bit showy-offy. It's driven by people from places like Chelsea, but it's one of the only cars like that I like, because I think it's so different and characterful and unique and really awesome, like in terms of its retro styling. It does retro better than the new Defender does, so I think it's flipping so cool. I love it. Too expensive, unnecessary. It uses a ladder frame chassis, which means it's incredible off-road, but on-road it's not as good as the Defender, etc. But flipping heck, it's a super cool car. Top speed 149 miles an hour. It is electronically limited to that, but you do have to pay extra for that because I think it's 137 originally. But it's got 577 bhp, 4-litre twin turbocharged V8. Sounds like absolute glorified thunder, and has 0 to 60 of about 4.5 seconds. So it's a quick car. I love the way they look, and I think they're really awesome. But let's get to the next one. Next is one I mentioned earlier. Now this is the least likely that I would get of any of the cars on this list. The Skoda Kodiaq VRS, just because it's a Skoda Kodiaq, which is a very good car, with now a 2-litre turbocharged petrol engine. I reckon the diesel was probably better though. I don't really know which one I go for. They go around the same power and stuff. I don't really know which I'd go for, the petrol or the diesel, but I would, if I had to, I'd go for Skoda Kodiaq VRS. This is the least. This is the car I would get the least on this list. However, there are a lot of SUVs I would get a lot less than the Skoda. So, yeah. Some EVs now. There are very few electric cars that I actually like, but two in particular are the Honda E and this, the Mazda MX-30. Now, there is a lot of debate with this car. Some people don't think it looks that good. I think it looks very good. I actually love the way it looks. And a bit like the Puma, it's not big enough to be classed as an SUV, really. It's a crossover. But this car has a lot of really cool aspects to it. Firstly, it's easily one of the best and most engaging cars, electric cars of this sort of price range to drive. And then it's also got suicide doors, which are cool. There's no other way to put it. Suicide doors are awesome. The thing is, it means it's not that practical compared to a bigger SUV. But obviously, it's not going to be that practical with suicide doors. The range is terrible. It can only do 124 miles or so on a charge. But it's not designed to be a long-range car. It would be too heavy. It's not that fast. But it's just different. And the thing is, the word different in the car world is incredibly important. That's what makes a really cool car, and that's why I like the MX-30, because it's very different, and for an electric car, that's what I think it needs. And it's one of very few electric cars I would actually go out and choose to buy. But there is a third that would be on the electric car consideration list, which is next. And that electric car is the Audi e-Tron S. Now, yes, that is the correct way of pronouncing it. It's pronounced e-Tron because it's a little e, and that's pronounced e, not e, in German. So, well, in any language, basically. It's just pronounced e-Tron. Anyway, away from the pronunciation of the name, it's a big, heavy SUV, and I know, shoot me, it's an SUV. I hate them normally, but there are a few that are fairly decent. And this is one of them. Now, it's been tuned by the S division. Now, it's basically, right, as an S car, it's not that good, because it's not. However, the weird thing is it's actually really agile. I mean, it can actually fully go sideways. It's got a setup on it where it can just go sideways fully. It's crazy how capable this car is, what it weighs. It's not as engaging enough for an RS or an S division Audi, but it's got 496 horsepower, which is a lot. Its range is not that good though, unfortunately, but I don't care. I just think there's something, I think they look fairly okay. I love them in dark blue. Dark blue Audi e-Tron S, I think looks quite good, to be honest. Yeah, I think they do. And they're quick. They're pretty cool in the fact that they have like sort of mouse ears for door mirrors as well on some of them as an optional extra, which I think is just really weird. But then the interior and the luxury and the fact they're dead quiet and they're good cruisers, they're just wrapped up in their own body basically. But I actually quite like it. And basically, I'm now going to rank them in the order that I would consider them in. So if it was personally my money, I would buy probably not hardly any SUVs. But I have to gloss over these 10 that I do like, because in the world of cars, SUVs are not going anywhere for a long time, so we have to deal with them, unfortunately, and that's why I've done this video on the 10. However, there are very few of these 10 that I would actually go out and buy, because there are better alternatives of them. Bar a few. Now, if it's my money, the first one I would go out and buy is the Audi SQ7 diesel, because that unique factor of it being a diesel and it sounding really cool, and actually being a very good load lugger and stuff, and actually a very good family car, for me, I wouldn't want one for driving about town in, basically. I wouldn't use it for the school run either. I'd actually just use it for how it's intended, to tow things, go away in, off-road in it. That's what it would be used for. Number 2 would be, I think, the GLB35, just about, because I love that it stands out. I think it's just a complete waste of car, really, in terms of the fact it's got no rivals. But if somebody said, would you have an A35 or GLB35? I would get a GLB35, because I don't understand why you'd go for an A35 when you get an A45. And the thing is, the A45 is way more expensive than the GLB. So people say, well, why would you get a GLB instead of an A45? Well, it's because at that price range, I would get a GLB. The price range up, which is what the A45's in, I would then get an A45. And they'd say, well, why don't we get a GLA? Because the GLA is less practical and not as good as the GLB as a family car. I don't understand. I sort of understand the existence of the GLB35 more than I understand the existence of the GLA. That car, now that Mercedes have shot themselves in the foot introducing the GLB35, because it means that there's no market for the GLA35 or the GLA45. Because firstly, the A-Class exists, and secondly, the GLB is a better car. I do not know, Mercedes. Anyway, that's what I would have as my number 2. My number 3 would be the Mazda MX-30, because it's a very good little electric car. I like that a lot. Number 4 would be the G-Wagon, the big G, because it's just crazy, and I think they're just flipping stupid. And stupid for me is a good word, because I think stupid cars are cool. Number 5, what would that be? Let's have a look going over the list. I think the CUPRA Formentor, because this doesn't have a better alternative, because the car on which it's based, which is the Golf R, is firstly slower than the CUPRA Formentor VZ5, and I couldn't drive one knowing it's worse than the Mark 7. Looks wise, it's terrible. Doesn't offer a manual option anyway, which just rules it out as a hatchback, proper hatch. And it's also got one of the worst infotainment systems of any car on sale. Volkswagen have seriously gone for style over substance with the infotainment system. It's terrible. That's why I wouldn't go for a Golf R, and I would therefore spend that money on a... Well, I wouldn't actually go that high up anyway. Go for, if it was me, Mark 7 Golf GTI Club Sport S, if I was going to go for a Mark 8 Golf range car, I'd go for a CUPRA Leon 300, the new one. And if I was going for an all-wheel drive equivalent of a Golf R, I would go for a CUPRA Formentor, because it is better looking and actually has a much better interior and is nearly as fast as the Golf. The VZ5 is a lot faster than the Golf, in fact. So that's what I would do. Next would be the... It's getting difficult now. Puma. I think. Because it's a very good little car, it's just not as good as a Fiesta. And that has an alternative that's better than it. Then I would go e-Tron because there are better alternatives to that car. I just think they're sort of cool. But and then I think last will be the Kodiaq because it's just Skoda Kodiaq with a more powerful engine. But it is a very decent car though, nonetheless. But then again, it's come 10th or whatever in this list of cars, SUVs I actually don't mind. So it's done fairly well, really, against all the rest of them, which there's millions of them. You will be looking at that going, you missed the Alfa and the Alpina. Yes, I did. Now, actually, the Alfa would be sort of in the same range as the Puma. If we take the Kodiaq off a minute, we're currently down to 7. Number 8 would be the Stelvio, because the better alternative is the much better Giulia. And why would you go for the Stelvio over the Giulia? I don't know. And then number 9 would actually be the Alpina XB7. I think, because it's a cool car and I like them. They're just a bit... I like them a lot. I mean, I would actually buy one. If I was going to get an SUV, I would probably buy one. It's just on this list against the rest of them. It's not as good as the rest of the cars. And I would less likely buy this over the top 4 and 5. The other ones I've just got, like for example the Stelvio, I would probably buy a Stelvio over the Alpina. It's just the fact that the Stelvio's got an alternative, which is the Giulia, means I would get a Giulia over the Stelvio. But then again, I would still get that over an Alpina XB7. The Alpina XB7 doesn't have any alternatives, basically. But yeah. My second option actually to the XB7 would be an X5M competition. The X6M competition I think is dire. It's absolutely dire, and I hate people who drive X6s because it's awful to look at. My eyes have gone blind because of that car. It's that ugly. And then obviously there's the Skoda Kodiaq last, which for reasons I've already explained comes last in the list of 10. Okay guys, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this video. I hope I'm not too boring. What do you think of SUVs overall? What are ones that you would consider buying yourself? And I want to know what you think. I will reply to you if you send a comment, and I will see what cars you like and if I would buy them, which is the majority of them I would probably say no to. But then again, you can still comment, see what you think about my choices. But until next time guys, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoy my content, put the notification bell on. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you very soon for some more videos.